Tonight, the Persian Gulf has become the graveyard of American naval supremacy. Not metaphorically, not theoretically, in operational reality documented in burning wreckage spread across 40 kilometers of the world's most strategically consequential waterway. What unfolded in the waters off Bandar Abbas in the past 24 hours represents the single most devastating blow to American military power since the Second World War. 18 warships, destroyers, cruisers, amphibious assault vessels, and support platforms that represent the concentrated expression of decades of American naval investment now sit on the floor of the Persian Gulf or list burning and uncontrollable on its surface. 12,000 American military personnel cut off from resupply, surrounded by Iranian naval and ground forces. Their chain of command severed by the destruction of the command and control infrastructure that connected them to CENTCOM have laid down their weapons. The instrument of this destruction was the Zolfaghar, Iran's domestically developed precision ballistic missile system built under sanctions, refined through years of testing and operational deployment, and fired last night in a salvo of 3,000 rounds from launch complexes concentrated around Bandar Abbas and dispersed across the Iranian coastline of the Strait of Hormuz. 3,000 missiles fired in carefully sequenced waves designed to overwhelm every layer of American naval air defense simultaneously. The mathematics of saturation applied with brutal, unforgiving precision to the most expensive collection of military hardware the United States has ever concentrated in a single theater. The shock in Washington is not the ordinary shock of a military setback. It is the existential shock of a superpower confronting the operational invalidation of the strategic assumptions that have underwritten its global posture for 70 years. American carrier battle groups were the unanswerable argument, the instruments whose mere presence was supposed to resolve disputes before they reached the threshold of conflict. That argument has been answered. The answer came from Bandar Abbas, and the answer was 3,000 Zolfaghar missiles arcing over the Persian Gulf in the pre-dawn darkness. How did Iran build the capability to execute an operation of this magnitude? What specific characteristics of the Zolfaghar system made it capable of defeating the most sophisticated naval air defense architecture ever deployed? How does the surrender of 12,000 American personnel reshape the global strategic environment in ways that extend far beyond the Persian Gulf? And what does a world look like in the aftermath of the day American naval supremacy died in the waters off Iran's southern coast? These are not comfortable questions. They are necessary ones, and this analysis will pursue them with the depth and the honesty that the magnitude of this moment demands. Before we go deeper, if this channel delivers the strategic clarity that the managed information environment of mainstream media systematically withholds, hit like, subscribe, and join the conversation below. Tell us, is this the moment that rewrites the global order permanently? Every comment sharpens the analysis. Part 1. The Battle of Bandar Abbas. How 3,000 missiles rewrote naval warfare. To comprehend what happened in the waters off Bandar Abbas, you must first understand the specific operational environment into which the American naval concentration had been deployed, and why that environment, which American planners assessed as manageable, proved to be anything but. The United States Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, had been reinforced in the weeks preceding the engagement as tensions along the Iranian maritime boundary escalated toward a crisis threshold. Additional destroyer squadrons were repositioned from the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean. An amphibious ready group, carrying a Marine Expeditionary Unit, was surged from Diego Garcia. The carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, already operating in the region, was joined by a second carrier strike group, bringing the total American naval presence in the Persian Gulf and adjacent waters to a concentration that American planners assessed would serve as a comprehensive deterrent signal. The assessment was wrong. Not because the assets were insufficient in any absolute military sense, wrong, because the assessment was built on a threat model that did not adequately account for what Iran had actually built, positioned, and prepared along the northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz and in the waters and terrain surrounding Bandar Abbas. Bandar Abbas is not simply a port city. It is the headquarters of the Iranian Navy, the home base of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, and the geographic anchor of Iran's most concentrated coastal defense infrastructure. The mountains rising immediately behind the city provide natural concealment for launch complexes that aerial surveillance struggles to fully penetrate. The islands of the Strait Abu Musa, the Greater and Lesser Tombs, provide additional positioning for sensor networks, missile batteries, and the fast attack craft that form the outer perimeter of Iran's maritime area denial architecture. In the months preceding the engagement, Iranian military activity in this geography had been assessed by American intelligence as elevated but not operationally decisive. That assessment failed to account for the degree to which Iran had pre-positioned Zolfaghar missile systems in hardened, dispersed launch facilities specifically designed to survive initial American strikes and execute a sustained salvo campaign against a naval concentration of exactly the kind that was now present in the theater. The operation began at 03:17 local time with a coordinated electronic warfare activation that preceded the first missile launches by approximately 4 minutes. Iranian jamming systems, sophisticated enough to complicate the data link communications between American surface vessels and their airborne early warning assets, were activated simultaneously across multiple frequency bands. The effect was not to blind American sensors entirely, but to degrade the speed and reliability of the threat processing that American naval air defense depends upon. In those 4 minutes of degraded situational awareness, the first wave of Zolfaghar missiles was already airborne. The Zolfaghar system fires a short-range ballistic missile with a maneuvering re-entry vehicle, a warhead that follows a ballistic trajectory to the terminal phase and then executes aerodynamic maneuvers designed to defeat the intercept solutions computed by shipborne missile defense systems. The combination of the ballistic approach profile, which stresses shipborne radar systems differently than cruise missile threats, and the terminal maneuver capability produced an engagement geometry that the standard missile systems defending the American formation were not optimally configured to defeat at volume. The first wave of approximately 600 missiles was targeted against the American destroyer screen, the outer layer of the formation's air defense architecture. Destroyers carry the most capable point defense systems in the American surface fleet, but those systems have finite magazine depths and finite engagement rates. When 600 missiles arrive in a compressed time window from multiple bearing angles simultaneously, the engagement mathematics become brutally simple. The system can service a certain number of intercepts per minute. The incoming volume exceeds that rate. Whatever exceeds the intercept rate reaches the ship. 4 destroyers were struck in the first wave. 2 sank within 30 minutes. 2 remained afloat but combat ineffective. Their weapon systems destroyed and their crews fighting fires that eventually forced abandonment. With the destroyer screen degraded, the second wave targeted the cruisers that formed the middle layer of the formation's air defense. Cruisers carry the Aegis combat system, the most capable integrated naval air defense architecture in the world. And in normal operational conditions, an Aegis cruiser is a formidable missile defense platform. But Aegis was designed and optimized against a specific threat model, and the Zolfaghar's maneuvering re-entry vehicle exploited the seams in that model with a precision that reflected years of Iranian study of American system capabilities and limitations. 3 cruisers were struck in the second wave. The fire control systems on the surviving American vessels were simultaneously managing the debris, the electronic noise, and the sensor saturation generated by the first wave impacts, while attempting to compute intercept solutions against the incoming second wave. The cognitive and computational load on the combat systems exceeded their designed operational parameters. By the time the third wave was airborne, the American formation had lost its coherent air defense architecture. Individual vessels were operating independently, their data link connectivity degraded by the ongoing electronic warfare campaign, their magazines depleted by the intercept attempts of the previous 2 waves, their crews operating in conditions of shock, damage, and rapidly degrading situational awareness. The third wave targeted the carriers, the ships that represent the concentrated expression of American naval power. The platforms whose flight decks carry the aircraft that project American military reach across the regional geography were now exposed to incoming fire without the layered defense that their operational doctrine requires. Both carriers were struck by multiple warheads. Flight decks were rendered inoperable. aviation fuel fires generated the kind of catastrophic secondary explosions that naval architects work to prevent and the damage control teams are trained to fight, but that at sufficient scale overwhelm the capacity of any crew to control. By 0612 local time, less than 3 hours after the first missile left its launch rail in Bandar Abbas, 18 American vessels had been destroyed or rendered combat ineffective. The surface of the Persian Gulf was covered in burning fuel, floating debris, and the evidence of what 3,000 missiles precisely sequenced and intelligently targeted can do to a naval formation that its operators believed was adequately defended. The 12,000 personnel of the Marine Expeditionary Unit, cut off from naval fire support, from air cover, from the logistics chain that sustained their operational capability, surrounded by Iranian ground forces that had been pre-positioned for exactly this contingency, faced a decision that no American military commander had confronted since the Korean War. They made the only decision that preserved their lives. Part 2, the Zolfaghar, the weapon that sank an empire. The Zolfaghar ballistic missile is not a weapon that appeared overnight. It is the product of a development trajectory that begins with Iran's earliest ballistic missile programs in the 1980s and proceeds through decades of iterative refinement, each generation incorporating lessons from the previous one and incorporating technological advances achieved through indigenous research, selective foreign assistance, and the kind of reverse engineering capability that sustained sanctions pressure paradoxically incentivizes. Understanding the Zolfaghar specifically requires understanding the Iranian philosophy of weapons development that produced it, a philosophy shaped by the strategic environment Iran has occupied since the revolution and refined by the specific lessons of every conflict in which Iranian weapons or Iranian-supplied weapons have been operationally employed. The foundational Iranian insight developed through careful study of American and Israeli military operations across the past 3 decades is that the most capable Western air defense systems are optimized against specific threat profiles. Cruise missiles flying at low altitude on predictable trajectories, ballistic missiles following simple parabolic paths whose re-entry parameters can be computed in advance by a defending system. The Western defense investment has been concentrated against these profiles because these are the threats that most regional adversaries can field. Iran decided to build something different. The Zolfaghar's defining characteristic is its maneuvering re-entry vehicle, the component that has made it so operationally effective against naval targets in the engagement we have just witnessed. A standard ballistic missile warhead, once separated from its booster, follows a predictable trajectory governed by ballistic physics. A defending system that can track the incoming object and compute its trajectory can generate an intercept solution with reasonable confidence. The maneuvering re-entry vehicle breaks this equation by executing aerodynamic course corrections in the terminal phase, the final seconds of flight when the warhead is closing on its target at hypersonic velocity. The corrections are not large in absolute geometric terms. They don't need to be. They need only be sufficient to defeat the intercept solution that a defending missile has already committed to. When a standard missile has been launched on a computed intercept trajectory, and the incoming warhead then executes a lateral maneuver of several hundred meters, the standard missile's own guidance system must recompute and adjust, and at the closing velocities involved. The available time for that adjustment is measured in fractions of a second. At individual engagement level, this challenge is manageable for a well-designed system. At the scale of 3,000 simultaneous engagements, with each defending ship managing dozens of threat tracks simultaneously, the cumulative effect of those individual engagement complications cascades into systemic defensive failure. The targeting system underlying the Zolfaghar's naval strike capability represents a separate dimension of Iranian technical achievement that deserves specific recognition. Hitting a moving naval vessel with a ballistic missile is a fundamentally different problem than hitting a fixed land target. The vessel's position at the moment of launch is not its position at the moment of warhead arrival. The missile must be targeted against a predicted future position that accounts for the vessel's speed heading and potentially evasive maneuvers. A targeting solution that requires continuous sensor updates as the missile flies. Iran has invested heavily in the over-the-horizon targeting architecture that makes this possible. Reconnaissance drones operating at altitudes that keep them beyond the effective range of shipborne point defense systems provide continuous optical and radar tracking of surface vessels. Satellite imagery available through Iran's own space program and through cooperative arrangements with other actors provides additional tracking data. Passive radar systems positioned on the islands of the Strait and along the Iranian coastline contribute targeting information without revealing their own positions through active emissions. The fusion of these multiple sensor inputs into a coherent, continuously updated targeting picture and the transmission of that picture to the Zolfaghar's guidance system in a form that allows course correction throughout the flight represents a systems integration achievement that Western intelligence assessments consistently underrated. The operational result of that underrating is currently burning on the surface of the Persian Gulf. The production and logistics achievement underlying a 30,000-round salvo is equally significant and equally underappreciated by those who assess Iranian military capability through the lens of what a sanctioned economy should theoretically be able to produce. Iran's ballistic missile industrial base has been built over decades into one of the largest and most capable in the world outside of the permanent members of the UN Security Council and a small number of additional states. The solid fuel production facilities, the guidance component manufacturing infrastructure, the assembly and testing capacity, the storage and transportation systems for pre-positioned munitions. All of this represents an industrial achievement conducted under comprehensive sanctions, surviving repeated attempts at physical sabotage and ultimately producing the operational inventory that was expended over Bandar Abbas last night. Every sanction that was imposed to prevent this capability from developing instead generated the institutional determination and the resource allocation priority that made its development inevitable. The strategic irony is precise and complete. The pressure designed to prevent Iran from building this weapon instead ensured that Iran built it, hid it, and waited for the moment when its employment would produce maximum strategic effect. That moment arrived last night, and the world is now living in its aftermath. Part 3. Washington's darkest hour. The superpower that could not respond. In the hours following the confirmation of 18 vessels lost and 12,000 personnel in Iranian custody, the American government entered a state of institutional crisis that has no precedent in the post-war era. Not the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was resolved through diplomacy before military engagement occurred at scale. Not Vietnam, which was a prolonged attritional defeat rather than a sudden catastrophic loss. Not the 1983 Beirut bombing, which was devastating but bounded. What confronted the American national security establishment in those hours was something categorically different. The sudden, documented, operationally undeniable destruction of a major American military formation by a regional adversary that the established strategic framework insisted should not have been capable of this. The immediate political pressure on the administration was ferocious and came simultaneously from multiple directions. Congressional leadership from both parties demanded emergency briefings. Military commanders at CENTCOM were simultaneously managing the immediate crisis, the rescue operations, the search for survivors, the assessment of what Iranian follow-on actions might be imminent, and trying to provide coherent strategic advice to political leadership that was itself struggling to process an event outside its experiential framework. The options available to the administration in those critical hours were each more problematic than the last. Direct military retaliation against Iranian territory carried the immediate risk of triggering the Hormuz closure that American planning had always identified as the threshold of global economic catastrophe. With 18 vessels already lost and the surviving American naval assets in the region in a degraded posture, the military capacity to conduct retaliatory strikes while simultaneously managing the consequences of a Hormuz closure was genuinely in question. Striking Iran while unable to guarantee the security of the Strait would be accepting both the military cost of further engagement and the economic cost of disrupted energy flows simultaneously. Escalation to nuclear threat. The ultimate American deterrent card carried consequences so catastrophic and so globally destabilizing that it existed as an option in planning documents rather than as a genuine, real-time decision possibility. The international reaction to a nuclear threat over a conventional military engagement, however severe, would be so damaging to American global standing as to constitute a strategic defeat exceeding the military loss it was designed to avenge. Accepting the loss and seeking a negotiated resolution, the option that the immediate welfare of 12,000 military personnel in Iranian custody argued most urgently for, carried its own devastating strategic cost. Every adversary of American power in every theater would draw the lesson that the commitment of sufficient capability to destroy an American military formation could be executed without triggering the unlimited American response that deterrence theory predicted. The administration found itself in the particular hell of a decision-maker confronting a situation where every available option produces outcomes worse than the status quo. This is the strategic trap that Iran had spent decades constructing, not through any single dramatic action, but through the patient accumulation of capabilities specifically designed to place American decision-making in exactly this impossible geometry. The silence from the White House in the hours following confirmation of the losses was not the silence of a government formulating its response. It was the silence of an institution in genuine shock, processing a reality for which its mental models, its planning frameworks, and its institutional experience had not prepared it. Allied capitals watched this silence with the particular attention of governments whose own security arrangements depend on the credibility of American guarantees. In Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Tel Aviv, in Seoul, in Tokyo. The question being asked was not only what the United States would do in response to this specific event, it was whether the foundational assumption of American security guarantees that the United States possesses both the capability and the will to respond decisively to attacks on its forces had just been operationally disproven. The answer to that question being formulated in those capitals in real time would reshape alliance relationships